And welcome to another episode of Tourmageddon. I'm your host, Oscar, and I'm here with my man,
Kenny.
And we have a special guest today. And Kenny, if you would like to go ahead and do the introduction.
Yeah, we have the illustrious, the talented, the suave, Brian Oakes.
Yeah, glad to be here, gents.
Thank you for coming out.
Yeah, man.
I literally just texted Brian. We were trying to figure out, we knew we needed to get some more episodes in the can, and I was like, who do I know locally that I would actually enjoy talking to? So I just texted Brian. I was like, can you be here next week?
Perfect.
So here we are.
Yeah, right on.
And for those of you that don't know who Brian Oakes is and what Brian Oakes does, can you give us a little background on exactly what it is that you do?
Yeah, well, I play guitar. I like guitars a lot.
I've been to his house. He does. He likes guitars a lot.
Yeah, I love guitars, yeah. No, so I moved in here in 2007 to play guitar.
So that's the real quick version, but where did that start from for you? Because that's career-wise, that's not where you started, right?
Yeah. So, I come from, I'm born and raised in Seattle. Moved here in 2007, like I said. We owned a home in Seattle and had a recording studio in it that I ran with a buddy of mine, and so I had played guitar since I was probably in junior high, but I started my career early on basically in sales. I graduated with basically a physiology degree from Seattle Pacific. Was in analytical, worked for a lab for a while, hated it. Running an instrument, looking for minerals and periodic table elements and water and soil and stuff. And so then I got into sales, and I was in analytical chemistry sales for a bit, and then moved into genetics and biotechnology sales. So he's
literally probably the smartest guitarist we've ever met.
That's what it sounds like. I like that.
It's sales. I knew some stuff, and so I worked for a company early on that had a system that discovered the BRCA1 gene, which is the breast cancer gene.
Okay.
Oh.
And so, but I was traveling a tremendous amount, like I don't know whether that changed in music or whatever, but and then that's when early stage internet in Seattle was starting to get out, and so I found a recruiter that believed in what we call transferable sales skills. If you can sell one thing well and understand how to people relationships, I could sell genetics or I could sell Freightliner engines. It doesn't matter, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm. And so he got me a job at a company called Sprynet, which is like one of the first internet browsers out there. And then I was there for like 2 weeks, and they sold it to Earthlink. So for the next 3 months, I was just told, hey, if you play golf, just make sure you have your cell phone. And cell phones back then, right? It was different. So
were you carrying one of those suitcases around?
Yeah, I had one of those, as well early on. But so then I ended up working for an internet startup, and so I was part of that whole Internet 1.0, when we sold Union Street in Seattle, one of our founders, who now owns a company called The Wrench out there. Now you can go out on The Wrench, is my friend Ed Peterson, the CEO there, where you can find somebody to come to your house and fix your car, right?
Okay.
And so Ed was the president of that car and of that company. I remember when we sold, Ed went out and bought a Ferrari. Right, and it was that whole generation of just a tremendous amount of money, really smart people. Ed was really smart. And then when that all ended, I ended up getting into telecom and worked for Alcatel out of Texas, a French telecommunications company that was then Alcatel-Lucent, now it's Nokia. So I spent 20 years in, building out networks for T-Mobile and AT&T on the sales side. So I sold the infrastructure to help build out the 3G and the 4G networks. And that led me up till 2007, where I was just like, well, as forums started coming out on the internet, I forgot what forum. I think the forum was Huge Racks Inc., which is actually a guitar rack thing. It's not something else. And I got to be friends with Michael Britt at Lone Star, and I ended up playing for Lone Star for a very short period of time. And Mike was like, "Hey, we're doing a tour down in California. You should come down and ride the bus and hang out." And I had this amazing boss then, she was, and I was still at Alcatel, and she was like, "Hey, just have fun, just take some time and just go out and have some fun." So I got off that tour, and I was like, "Hey, man, I think I could do this. I can play this." Little did you know, when you think you can play guitar, and then you move to this town, and like it's
humbling experience.
It's super humbling, yeah. And so we sold the house. We were lucky, got good money for the house, and sold here to Nashville. Moved to Spring Hill, and that was 2007.
Wow. When were you playing with Lone Star? Were you with them like in 11?
Yeah, somewhere around then. I know that what happened with that is that when Richie left Lone Star and Cody, I forgot Cody's last name, came on as replacement for Richie, I came out and played then. And then, it wasn't very long until I auditioned for the Danny Goki gig.
Okay.
And I did that and left Lone Star. And in hindsight, I just should have stayed with Lone Star.
Were you a part of? I'm starting to think that we might have met earlier than we realize.
I don't think so. It was the Point of Grace Mark Schultz tour. That was 2009.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure because you were LD. You were LD on that gig, and I'm pretty sure that's where I met you.
Yeah, well, so I did some stuff with Lone Star like in 11, but I guess if we were in 09, that would have been it.
Yeah, no, because we were on one bus, and their bus at that point in time was parked out at their bus barn.
So I think it probably was then.
Yeah, but I mean, because that was my first tour, so that was my first big tour, the Point of Grace. I mean, I had done a bunch of stuff in Nashville, but nothing where it was like, hey, this is legitimate. We did 3 runs, 3 different tours on that around the United States. And I got that gig through Mark Childers, who's Carrie's MD, Carrie Underwood's MD. And Mark kind of gave me my break as far as getting me into, that touring gig, which was like, I still look back on that and just think that was just a really fun tour.
Yeah. Well, it's funny when you see all these, you were talking about this earlier, kind of just all these paths that you end up, one path diverges and how you end up in all these different places.
Yeah.
And just seeing some of the kind of choices that you make, and how you end up where you end up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, a lot of it was relationships down. And my friend Sean, who was guitar player with Carrie for a long time, introduced me to Mark. And then Mark was Dana Capolino, Lee's husband with the girls, and had coffee with him. Felt like it was a good fit. And then I ended up playing for Mark Schultz as his MD, or Mark doesn't do a lot of band stuff anymore for, 10 plus years. Yeah. We don't play that much anymore, but he's still out doing great stuff. But yeah.
I miss Mark.
Yeah.
I still get a picture every Christmas from that Christmas tour he did where I was wearing a Santa outfit. Every Christmas I get a text from Mark. And it's just
with the Santa?
It's just me in this picture that's at this point like 10 or 11 years old of me in a Santa costume.
Yeah.
Every year, like clockwork, I get it from him.
Yeah.
Every Christmas.
He's they moved back to North Carolina, I think.
Okay.
So he's not in Nashville anymore.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, so now you're here.
Yeah.
Now you're playing guitar.
Yep. Still playing guitar. Still love guitars.
What you got questions? If I start getting off the rails, you can reel me in. But I'm just kind of.
No, you're good, man.
When during this whole transition period, so you decided to move here. Was this kind of like a leap? Like, I'm gonna do this. I don't really have a backup plan. What was kind of your thought process when you did that?
Well, I mean, I think that my move here was pretty calculated, right? I'm a pretty calculated person. I like to know where my bills are going to be taken care of, and where they're coming from and whatnot. And so I had saved up some money, and coming from the Seattle market, we had money coming in here to have a little bit in savings. Right, it wasn't such a like, oh my gosh, I'm not sure what to do with my wife and 2 kids if we can't make a bill. So I mean, I moved here and I was 37. I'll be 55 this year, and so I remember Ronnie Brookshire, who's a good friend but an amazing engineer, was really big on a lot of the 80s and 90s CCM stuff, like the really, really great stuff, which I'm still a huge fan of. Especially guitar work of those guys back then. And he's like, man, you just moved here 20 years too late, Because, I mean, at 37, you're already coming into a market where you're, especially in the country, you're playing for younger girls. Yeah. And anything older than that, you look like creepy dad on stage, right? And now it's like creepy grandpa, And and so, I mean, we moved down to Spring Hill, and we probably lived there about 9 months before we moved to East Nashville. But when I got here, I was just, and then another really good friend, who's still a dear friend of mine, Justin Ostrander, who's just completely killed it now, is probably one of the top session guys in town. We worked a lot together, and he'd do something and get me on or whatever, and so I started getting into the mix that way. But, having the studio in Seattle, I didn't do session stuff at this level by any means, but I never got to tour because that wasn't Seattle's thing. So I wanted to move here just to tour, and that was what my focus was. I didn't really ever say I'm going to tour like Justin was like, I'm going to tour for, he worked up through I think David Nail, and when he was done playing with David, he's like, I just want to, at that time, I don't think that they had kids, but I want to work sessions. And that was that's a big jump, giving up all your road stuff and just trying to jump in it. But he did it, and Justin's amazing. And but I just wanted to be a touring guy. So at that point in time, I was just taking anything. I would take anything to get out and play.
So it was like a priority for you to really use your, you wanted to play guitar no matter what. So I know that you say you moved in here. Well, you moved to Nashville at 37 years old. I guess most people would kind of, I don't want to say give up on their dream or anything like that, but they kind of would look for the more secure way of doing things.
Yeah, what I did was just kind of flop because I had a career, and I had a really successful career.
Right.
And so, and when I got here, there were a few years where I really didn't do much of that, but some of those years I was consulting for companies, and I'd be on the bus with my laptop.
Right.
And
I think you did that even when we were out. I mean, there'd be times Oaks would disappear, and you'd find him somewhere in the back of the bus on his laptop.
Yeah, where I'd be up on a conference call in the front of the bus with the driver. And so and that was my way to be like, hey, I can do this, but like telecom money is way better than music money.
Yes.
Or just sales money at that level, the level that I was at.
I mean, let's be honest, there's a lot of things that are better than music money.
Music money, yeah. Yeah, I think working at White Castle is better these days. But I think when I first got here, I just tried to focus on that, but as time went on, I was like, hey, I think the first year in Nashville, I made $15,000, 2007 or 2007 to 2008. I mean, that's a lot of playing for songwriters at Caney Fork for $25 or $50, being Ostrander, just trying to get through number charts, back then. But and then it got better. I played for more people, but when the Point of Grace Mark Schultz gig came up, I did that, and then from there I just moved more into the country stuff. Yeah, and then I just played for.
Well, you got to move towards the money.
I guess.
I mean, no hate towards CCM, but the dollars are slightly greener.
And back then, when I was, before those next 4 or 5 years, you could still make okay money playing. Now it's just, it's just a lot less.
It's tough out there for a player.
It's tough out there for players, and everybody is really great. I think that when, I can go on to, like, I was in my studio today looking up something, way to play around a chord progression on something, and go on YouTube, blah, 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 and all of a sudden there's some, 7-year-old kid from Vietnam that can play better than I can ever play. But there's all these just unbelievably talented people out there. Now, that doesn't mean that, there's a very strict delineation between an amazing player and then somebody that can work in an industry.
Right.
There's a big difference,
Well, I feel like there's players and there's musicians, and I think it's exactly that. You can play really well, but can you do all these other things?
Yeah. Can you deal with management? Can you be asked to play something that you don't want to play, or is hard for you to play, or you just don't like to play it, or and that's just part of being a professional in this industry. You have to. There's a lot of times you have to suck up a lot of things, but that's okay because that's what. When you sign, it says, "Yeah, I'll take the gig." You kind of have to do that. But you
have to pay your dues.
You have to pay your dues, and just be a good person, good guy.
It's funny that the more people we interview, like being a good person and just relationships with everybody is basically like the most important thing.
It's the cornerstone. I mean, I think we'll see that as a common thread with the more people we talk to. it really is the common thread.
Mm-hmm.
Just don't be a jerk.
Yeah.
Like 90% of this is don't be a jerk,
Mm-hmm.
because it is so relational. You know, if we look at your career, everything is, well, I worked with this person, and then I met this person,
And they recommend you, you know.
right. And if you're a jerk, that doesn't happen. You
No.
don't get recommended again. And so it really is you climb the ladder in this business by getting along with people.
Yeah.
Really, at the end of the day, I mean, everybody, there's a limit for everything, but I think for the most part, as long as you can.
Well,
get
I
along
mean,
with
I mean, and if you have moved here, and you get any gig has any kind of a name to it, especially a label gig, and you can stick with that for a bit, you're a good player then. I mean, if you get to the point where you get asked and you can keep a gig,
Mm-hmm.
then you can really play, because there's playing is a given.
Right.
There's a lot of guys that are just unbelievable players, but wouldn't make it through longevity here just because they're not fun to be around, or
Yep.
or they drink too much and get belligerent with somebody, or just kind of dumb stuff, right? But
Yep.
the people that really have a great career here are people that can play, because at that level, really everybody can play.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the longevity here is being a person that everybody says, I just want to be around that person. They're just a lot of fun, they work well with everybody,
It's literally almost word for word. We just had the LD from Korn on, and we asked him about it. It was literally almost word for word. It's, do I want to hang out with you again?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, then I want those people on tour with me.
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
want.
If you don't have some place to go to Thanksgiving, am I going to be embarrassed if you come to my house?
Yeah.
Wow, I like that one.
kind of a thing.
great,
So,
yeah.
it's those are the kind of people that you want to be around. And I've got this long trail of relationships here in this town of people that I just really enjoy.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But there's just a lot of great players.
Well, I mean, to your point, it's a given. Like that, it's almost not even a checkbox. Like if you get that call, we have already assumed that you are a great player.
Yeah.
So now, can you fill out the rest of that?
Well, and I think for me too, it's like there are gigs that I had that there were people that were much better players than I was or I will ever be. There's people that's all they've done their entire lives is play guitar. That was not me.
Right.
Yeah.
I when I should have been practicing in my bedroom, I was on a corporate jet to Paris.
Well,
Meaning that like I had this great career and got to these fun things, but there were people that just that's all they've ever wanted to do is just play guitar, and it shows.
Yeah.
And so I think I was really fortunate to have some people to create some good relationships, and I could play, really well when I moved here. But the relationships is kind of what helped me get here and get gigs, and then become even a much better player. So.
And he doesn't suck. I've heard him play. He's, it's pretty passable for the stuff that I've heard.
But yeah.
So going back to the tours, like which is one that is the most memorable for you, the one that you've had the most enjoyable experience, but at the same time, I know every tour has its challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Which one for you has been the most enjoyable?
Well, I think that there's a couple of them. The first one that I did with Point of Grace Girls and Mark was great because it was my first big tour, right?
Okay.
I think that was just fun to do. I think the first tour was just something that was a good one, with buses and trucks and everything, and that was really fun. I think that musically, I played. One of the funnest things I did is I played for Jed Hughes and Sarah Buxton Hughes. And both of them are unbelievable artists in their own right. Jed's just a phenom of a guitar player. Sarah's a phenom of a writer. They're both great writers, and they had Dan Huff put together, or told me they should do a duo called Buxton Hughes, and so we did that for a while. But just being behind them playing guitar and listening to them do what they do every night was pretty amazing. The funny story about that tour or those dates that we did is that my son was learning to skateboard, and we were over in East Nashville at the time. I took him to Rocketown, to skateboard. I was like, hey, he had a half pipe there. And he says, I think that I'm going to go try it. So I got a skateboard. I used to skateboard as a kid. Went up and got halfway around the turn, and one foot went one way, and the other foot stayed.
Oh.
And my son was old enough to drive a car if he had to. He's probably 13. The couple miles home, because I almost didn't get home, but I was in a boot most of those gigs. One of those big boots up on stage you're playing for Jed and Sarah. So musically, I think that that was a great gig. As far as the coolest thing have done is probably the tour I did with Paul Brandt in 2019. If people don't know who Paul Brandt is, he would be considered kind of within the Trisha Yearwood range, the Alan Jackson, that kind of era of '90s country. But up in Canada, he's superstar. And that was a big tour. We were playing arenas, and it was cold. It was about 5.5 weeks in the wintertime up in Canada. Yeah, I mean, it was miserably cold. But as far as as playing for Paul, first of all, is an unbelievable human being. Most of his time now is spent combating human trafficking up in Canada with an organization called Not in My City. So if you go up to the bathrooms and like some of the airports, you'll see a yellow rose. That's a safe place for people to come that are being trafficked. And so Paul has got a really great heart for helping that. But just the immensity of that tour is something that I had not done. Like I never had landed, like a huge gig. I never, it was never like a Carey or a Luke or a Jason Aldean or some of those. I played for a lot of artists that were not quite at that level. And so when we did Paul's tour, I mean, our first on-tour rehearsal was in an arena. And that was just fun because as a kid going to see these shows, and I was like, man, I just want that to be me. And so, that was the last tour that I did before COVID. And now with situations a little bit different for my wife and I now, so touring isn't really an option at this present time. We take care of my mom. She lives on our property, and so we spend some time making sure that my mom's okay. And but that was just super fun. I mean, getting to play Rogers Place in front of 25,000 people is just
it's and we've talked about this before. It's like a drug.
It is
that feeling when you're, it's the reverse for us. It's me standing at a front of house, on a front of house stage, and you just kind of look out, and it's, you hear all these people stomping their feet.
Yeah, and you can't see anybody. I remember my friend Sean Tubbs, who's, one of the best guitar players I've ever heard. When he was with Carey, he just said, you just gotta smile at the exit signs, on the third, on the third level, because you have no spatial awareness of anybody about 50 feet out.
Yeah.
And so
that's my fault usually.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. For all the times I walked off the front of the stage. Yeah. But yeah, playing for the big, especially when sound is right.
Well, and there's almost like an electricity. Like you almost don't need to see the people, because you can feel that level of energy in a room when you're in an arena that size.
Yeah, when that many people are screaming or singing Alberta Bound, the whole place is, singing along with Paul is pretty amazing. That was really fun.
So like with so many people, or kind of like the first times you did that in front of so many people, playing in front of so many people, did it ever get to you like in the first couple of times, like, oh man, this is a lot of people, I don't know, maybe mess up a couple chords, or it was just kind of like an innate thing that you were just ready for?
No, I never really was I never really ever got nervous doing that. I mean, when I was playing for Danny, we opened CMA Fest. That was it. It wasn't Nissan then, whatever it was before.
Oh, was it Oilers? Or
no, what was the stadium before? It was Nissan Stadium.
Yeah, it was something
LP
field.
Yeah, I played LP.
I don't know why I said
and
Oilers.
That was like whatever 50,000, and that was the biggest crowd I ever played for. I played on Good Morning America with Tiffany and Debbie Gibson. And that was a couple hundred million, and so I was probably more nervous than that because I realized that everybody.
But like the 25 people in the studio.
Yeah, well, it was Central Park, right? Out at the GMA stage or whatever. But yeah, no, I mean, you're right. There is this kind of sense of just this immensity of it, and being able to go on and realizing when you're playing something, you got a lot of people watching you, and I always tried to play the perfect show where where everything was perfect. And always something little happens, you know, it's
never goes as planned.
There's just and that's making music with people. It's, you know, it's not like a studio and where you have more control and even this town, you know, moves through songs so fast in studios. You know, my session world was a little bit more of the LA mentality where you took a little bit more time to it than Nashville, which is how I approach what I do now a little bit more so. But there's nothing like getting, especially sometimes like if you're lucky enough where you don't have to have ears, because I'm not a big fan of ears, never have been. That's just because I'm old. You pull an ear out and you can hear this juk on guitar, and you can hear it bounce off the back wall, and the further away that back wall is, the better. You just feel like you're playing for Queen back in the 70s. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's a drug. Like this is the only way to describe it. Is it's a drug that I have yet to find a replacement for.
Yeah,
and I think it'll always be that way. What I don't miss is loading in to hockey arenas in winter.
Well, I mean, that hour that you play or the half an hour or whatever it is the best. But touring the rest of that time can be awfully brutal. It's boring,
especially in winter in Canada. I did a November run where we went all from West Coast to East Coast, and that was brutal.
We did it in January. Wow. We were in Regina one day, and it was minus 60 without the wind chill. It was the coldest place on Earth, and colder than the sunny side of Mars.
Jeez.
and then like the diesel the scrubber on the bus broke.
Oh man,
it was so cold, so you couldn't. Your eyes would freeze. It was cold, but still, you know, it's. You know, there's just a lot of those times in those.
And those people will still show up. That's the crazy thing, is they'll still show up in droves for that show.
Yeah. Everybody's wearing like $4,000 worth of parkas, you know. I felt bad for the crew because, you know, y'all were getting, you know, it's 6 o'clock, you're off the bus. And, you know,
feeling it.
And then you guys are eating what's left of the pizza when you get back on at 11:30 before the bus rolls at midnight. And all of us are like, I don't know, what do you want to do today? I don't know. Is there football on?
Yep. What can we go see today?
Yeah.
Different side of the tour.
Do we have runners? Yeah. Is there a mall?
Are there showers?
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. You know, as you know, playing guitar or music is your craft. Is there any other? Were you always musical? Is it like, did you start out with a different instrument, or it was just kind of like I played a guitar and this was just it?
Yeah, that was it. I mean, it was all of my family. There was no musicians in my family. They were all Boeing engineers. Everybody that was a male in my family worked at Boeing, being from Seattle. Both my grandfathers, my dad, my stepdad, everybody, my mom. And I'm not even sure where. I remember getting home from school and just could not wait to see if I could get Unchained on rotation on MTV to see Eddie play, you know, and I still can't really play any Van Halen stuff. It's like that was not my musical guitar influence per se, but the respect I had for those guys, the Alex Life's Rush, you know, the AC/DC stuff, Maiden, you know, that when The Wall came out with Pink Floyd, that guitar solo was just like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And so then I just wanted to play guitar. I had nothing about getting girls, and I was only 5th grade, right? You know, I just wanted to play guitar. In fact, in college I had a band, and we never dated all through college until I met my wife as a senior year because we were just too busy playing music. So I always just wanted to play guitar. Yeah,
that's cool.
Love guitars.
Yeah. So are there like, even when you went on tour, I know there's a lot of downtime and stuff like that we were talking about. Is there any like, do you like practice on a daily basis, or was it like, you know, it was just like your innate thing? Like what things did you do to kind of keep up with that, you know?
I mean, a lot of it was just keeping your fingers, especially when it's cold, you know, you really kind of have to spend some time. You know, I remember before on on Paul's tour, the other guitar player, Jeff Sin, who makes unbelievable guitars, lives in town, Sin Guitars. Jeff would probably play for an hour, just keeping the fingers warm. And I didn't do it that long, but it's just that regimen of just
like before they even went on.
Oh yeah, you have to when it's cold. You've got to get because sometimes you walk onto, you know, if the stage was, even when we had this, our stage was huge, but most time we were still on ice that was covered, right? And it was just cold. But even on the other tours, it's just good to try to learn something, and if you can. But I didn't do it all the time. I know there's people that go out on tour and they're just, that's all they'll do during the daytime is sit with the guitar in the back lounge or something like that.
Bunch of nerds.
Yeah.
So what have you noticed as like a trend? Especially being here in Nashville since you moved here. Like as far as like the music goes, like what have you noticed as time goes on?
Well, I mean, I think there's probably no like big secret of where some of the frustration is with country music. It's the simplicity of it. I think is still kind of pervasive. I think that you have some standouts, the Sturgills of the world or the Stapletons, and there's a lot of great artists. But with the whole way that people are releasing, and this is just my perspective, of course, but releasing singles right now instead of real records. You might do a gig, but a single may not get you very far, and so you might do a small run, and then after that's done, you're just trying to find the next thing.
Yeah.
Where when I was out there, records were still being out there, so you might play for an artist, and you may not have a ton of dates, but you'd be playing for the next year.
Well, you'd play that album cycle.
Yeah, you play that, right. And that's not the way that I see it, anymore. You have, the rarities like Morgan Wallen, right? And he's uber talented, and he's got some actually really pretty darn cool songs. And to me, he's a little bit of a rarity, but getting on gigs like that is difficult to find a great artist that has got more than just a single. Like I think this whole album is singles or whatever, something crazy. But otherwise you're just kind of. And I was going from gig to, if I was down, I'd be trying to find something just to keep the bills paid back then. But it seems to be even more difficult. And I think that the level of musicianship has gone up as well. I think also because of things like YouTube, where the learning curve is a lot.
That barrier to entry is not there. Like
there's some pretty ridiculous players that are in this town at this point in time.
Well, I mean, because even if you look back, even in the early days of the internet, if you want to learn how to play guitar, you were still going to get lessons. There was a financial barrier to entry. It wasn't just do you have an instrument? It was like, okay, cool, you have an instrument, but now you. I mean,
it was backing the tape player up. It was listening to a CD and really not being able to stop it, or until the computer came out where you could, iTunes came out where you could kind of stop the bar and learn something. It was a whole lot more difficult to learn that stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, to your point now, it's like you can look up any song on YouTube and you will find someone teaching you how to play it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even the super difficult, some of this Polyphia and some of these guys that these guitar players are coming out now are just, Julian Assange are just mind-blowingly technical.
Yeah.
And can pull this stuff off live, which is a whole nother thing. There's a lot of players that you can watch on YouTube, but then you watch these guys play it live and you're like, I don't even know how that's physically possible.
Yeah.
But that's just the ability of first of all, people really trying to take the instrument to a completely different place, and there is a lot of that out there right now. But that's not those aren't the guys that are trying to get the gig playing for Kelsey Ballerini, right? Or Morgan Wallen or whatever. Those are guys that want to be in the touring thing, want to do the big tours, and everybody is great players.
No, that's true.
Yeah. So are there any like specific guitarists that I know you mentioned some of the bands that you listen to, but are there any guitarists that you're just
totally.
like, oh man,
I grew up I grew up listening to early on it was the rock stuff. It was AC/DC, Back in Black, still one of my favorite records. Fleetwood Mac, Rumors, those two records are probably my two favorite records for very different reasons, but listening to the CCM stuff early on, it was for sure Jerry McPherson, who's still he's always been just a stalwart here in this town. Gordon Kennedy with some of the Susan Ashton stuff. And then the LA stuff was a huge influence on me, like when Dan Huff moved to LA and started doing all that, but he was doing the CCM stuff here, super young. So it was Dan, but the LA guys, probably my biggest influence is Michael Landau. And if you're a guitar player, you know who Landau is, but he was just a session guy back in the time where the big racks.
Yeah.
I still have one. I'm still always adding to it. That's kind of home base for me. But my point is it was mostly those session guys. It was the CCM guys, the Jerry Gordon, Dan here in this town. And then it was Landau, Steve Lukather. I'm still a giant Toto fan. You know, it's those guys that are the guys that I still go back and listen to how they did stuff. Because it's you know, the level that they played at back then was just something else.
Well, it's like the late 80s, 90s, and CCM was. I think that was a point in time where CCM was not lagging behind.
Yeah,
there was some
worship
really cool stuff,
and the worship music hadn't hit. I think that's kind of like Nirvana killed pop. I think the worship music, kind of killed a lot of. Like if you go back and listen to Dan Huff play guitar on Michael W. Smith's The Big Picture or Eye to Eye, right?
Yeah.
Listen for how just the sheer virtuosity or some of Dan's solos on Matthew Ward's Armed and Dangerous record. He was one of the members of the second chapter of Acts. And then you listen to, Tales from the Bulge, which is Michael Landau's first solo record, which is almost like hallowed ground for most guitar players. Just unbelievable. Where on those records too, you didn't have like 112, 120 tracks where, if you muted 5 of the keyboard parts, it wouldn't make any difference in the mix.
Right.
It's just, it's kind of like, you look at a waveform on that stuff, it looks like Hitler's mustache. There was like it was just one black line, and on those records were so good because there just wasn't that much going on. Listen to Cuts Like a Knife by Bryan Adams. There's like 5 guys playing that stuff. And so when you hear that lick from Cuts Like a Knife, it's like, man, that's a pretty simple lick, but it's epic.
Yep.
And it sounds so good,
Yeah, I mean, that's it's funny. You mentioned Michael W. Smith. I love a bunch of that stuff from, the late 80s, early 90s because they were epic records. Like they were just big.
Yeah.
Like everything was big, but it wasn't noisy.
No.
And
you can hear everything. Like, you listen to that stuff and listen to like The Hand of Providence. I think that's off Eye to Eye. And everything had its place in the mix. And you could hear a little guitar part, and then you could actually hear the reverb on that guitar part on a side. And now it's kind of oatmeal-ish.
Yeah.
And back then you could listen to Dan play those parts, and you could hear you could actually hear what he was using. I think that was that Rev 7 patch. Yeah. You had that ability to hear that stuff, and music these days, it doesn't matter if you're playing through an amp or a pedal direct in. There's so much in these mixes that it just doesn't have the same
stuff
to me.
The same.
And it was interesting because if you listen to a lot of those records where like you said, they sounded big because you had the onset of tape, right? Tape machines, which are inherently punchy, but then you also had these sequencing machines that were very punchy just in nature. And so those two things together, listen to Lamu off of The Big Picture, Michael's, that epic record he had. And when all those keyboards came in, it's just like everything just sound, and the louder you turned it up, the bigger it sounded. Yeah. It wasn't like you turn it up and it just was, you started losing stuff. And here, man, it's like, listen to that snare, a great snare. And those records were mixed sometimes about a little bit above the vocal. And so why does stuff rock so hard? It's like because there's not as much in there. And
well, it's the less is more mentality.
Oh, totally, 100%. I mean, listen to Back in Black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
3 chords.
Yeah. Yeah. There's just,
but it still rocks.
And when you crank that stuff up, it just sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
At loud volumes.
Yeah. 100%. So if somebody was going to come up in this industry and they're like, man, I want to be, I love playing my guitar. I want to go on tour. I want to play for these big names. What's something that you would, and it's funny that you mentioned that move from Seattle to Nashville because, they always say that your environment influences and it could take away or either take away or add on and make you more of a master of your craft. So what advice would you give to somebody that wants to, kind of do what you did and tour with these big names and play their instrument?
I mean, I think that some people will reach out, and a lot of times I say, make sure that your love for music doesn't get diluted by the difficulty of being a musician here. And if that means getting a job, right, it means doing something so you can, especially if you're married, you get married and have kids, that's a whole different dynamic than just being here and being single.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and to make sure that, first of all, you're fulfilling your responsibility to your family, you know. And if that means getting a job and working your way in until you can do that, then do so, right?
Right.
You know, if you're single and moving here, that's a whole different ball game. But I mean, it really comes back to the relationships. It comes back to creating relationships that are genuine, because you can tell people that when you call it like networking, right? And I'm not really crazy about that word, because the connotation is like, I'm just going to go out and network and try to meet a whole bunch of people that I really don't care about. I'm just trying to say, hey, man, if you're here for anything, which is like, that's like getting the hole when you're watching golf. It's like, just don't say that, you know, right? I think that getting in those circles, but now you also have to be, to rise above the din here, you have to be a pretty unbelievable player. I think, you know, I think that there's, because there's so few gigs anymore. Like, you can forget about the CCM stuff, because that wasn't, that's not even, so, and that was a huge part of Nashville, right? So now we're more into the commercial side of this country. I mean, you've got some rock here, there's for sure. I mean, you know, the Cinderella guys are here, and, you know,
there's a bunch of rock guys here, but it's weird because a lot of it doesn't leave out of here. You know what I mean? You know, they're all here. They live here.
And that's still a fairly small cadre of people, right? I mean, you know, a lot of those guys kind of interchange. And so country is the only thing where if you have a new artist coming up, you can get on some of these things. But I would be, you know, if you're going to be prepared to jump around a lot.
Yeah.
You know, you know, you get on a run of dates of 7 or 9 dates, and that just might be it for that artist. And so you always really, and I don't, if I were to do it now, I'm not even sure I would know how to approach it. Like, I was lucky, because when I first moved here, Mark believed in me, and he, at that point in time, he was Carrie's musical director. That was the Jesus Take the Wheel days, right?
Right.
And so Mark really helped me. And once I got that gig, that kind of, you know, I mean, at that point in time, a lot of the guys in Carrie's first rendition of the band were my good friends, and some of them are still some of my best friends, and they really helped me get started. So, but coming in here now, you know, it's not as always easy to. I was blessed to have some people that I knew that wanted to help me.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm coming in these days. It's just trying to get connected is difficult. It is difficult.
I think whether people like it or not, budgets will always play a role, and because of, I won't say oversaturation, but due to the saturation of really good players, you know, the budgets will sneak up on you. And so that's why you're going to end up jumping around at some of these times too, is you may be getting paid what you're worth, but there may be somebody willing to do it cheaper because they're newer and they're just as good.
And the problem with that is that I remember I was asked to be an MD for, and I'm not going to go into who it was, but now the artist is huge. And it was, when I was asked to do it, it was 150 a show, not a day. Yeah. And it was a lot of dates. It was, you know,
even a lot of dates. That's a rough number. That's a rough number to make work and pay bills and
but if you're making 100, you know, that's $15,000 for 100 shows. It was something like that, right? And I'm like, I mean, and that's pretty hard to make work. And the problem was somebody took that gig, and it wasn't me, because I was making way more on the stuff that I was doing, and I didn't have to be gone as much. And so it's like, well, I could, let's say I was making $400 a gig or whatever, you know, which still is not that much, you know. I mean, but the problem is that people come in, and what they're doing is they're cannibalizing their own future.
Yeah.
Right? Because that just means you start getting a gig, and somebody else that's as good or better or not as good as you necessarily comes in and takes that gig. And when that happened, that was 4 or 5 years ago, and now that's commonplace.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I have a standard from what I, you know, at this point in time, what I'm willing to take for it, unless it's somebody like I really want to play for, and maybe then I'll just,
I mean, it's the same on the other end. I had a number. If you wanted me to get off the couch, there was a number.
Yeah.
Unless, there were some tours. I mean, Mark actually was one of those that I did a couple of runs with Mark that I would have not gotten off the couch for that number. But it was, I got to hang out with you. I got to hang out with Mark. There were reasons. It's like, this is 3 weeks, whatever. I'm fine doing that. But I think that's the other thing. I think when you, in this business, you have to decide what you're worth.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's very easy to be taken advantage of.
Yeah. Well, and I see a lot of, like, when I played it, I was playing with Rita Wilson at CMA this year, the actress and Tom Hanks' wife. And Rita is unbelievably sweet. And I've done some stuff with her last three CMAs I've played with Rita. And I see a lot of, we played the Dr. Pepper stage this year, and I see a lot of guys that are coming on the stage that I see, they work at a cigar store, or they, which I applaud them, because first of all, I listen to these guys playing, like, well, you cover the gig great, you play the parts, you sound great, but they're trying to hold down the fort somewhere else.
Yep.
Because I think in the past you used to be able to come to this town and be like, I think I can make this work. You could make $300 or $400 a show, get enough shows playing for enough different artists. Even if you're making 250,
right?
You can piddle enough of that together when Nashville had not blown up here, and you could still do it. I don't know how people do it now. That's why I say, get a job. I mean, a good friend of mine now plays. I forgot the guy's name. The artist. Anyway, he went out and got his license to cut hair, be a barber, and then he got this gig, and now they're doing stadium tours. But that was something that he fell into. But he was smart enough to be like, hey, as long as this is going to last, it's my friend Mark DeJanes. Okay. He was the bass player that I hired when I was band leader for Post Monroe, which was Whitney Duncan's, one of the girls in that band, and he, I can't remember the artist name that he plays for. Both him and his brother Luke plays drums, great producer in town, and Mark plays bass. But before Mark got that gig, he was looking at, got his license to cut hair, and Mark is sweet guy, which I was like, I'm just going to ride this as long as I can, and that's the attitude that you need to have here. Yeah, it's like I'm gonna do whatever I can, but I'm gonna make sure that I can take care of business as well. And luckily, the gig worked out for him. But he's like, as long as this lasts, it's great. But he's smart enough to have something else.
Yeah.
It's funny. My wife just worked on a short film, and one of her actors, same thing. He wanted to be an actor, but he wanted that flexibility, so he went and got his barber license too, and that was kind of his thing. Was it gives me the flexibility to do what I need to do. Yeah. But I can still make money.
Yeah, it's super smart, because then you can be like, I think I enjoy playing guitar more now than I have in a long time, because now I'm doing stuff that I want to do. Yeah. And as I said, I'll be 55 this year. At some point in time, you with any job, you either retire or you get let go. There's only two things in there, and it's really no difference here in music. At some point in time, you get old enough where you just don't want to play anymore. You've had a great career, or you just stop getting called. I just don't get called anywhere near as much as I used to. But again, my situation in life has changed a little bit, but I'm okay with that. I've had an unbelievable career in this town. Like, it's been a dream.
I think that's kind of the goal, though, right? Like, at the end of it, the goal is to, I just want to do the things that I want to do. Like, if I can survive and be comfortable, and I just do the gigs that I want to do, I think that's kind of like the ultimate goal. You're not having to work to get by. I'm I'm not doing these crap gigs because I need it to pay my electric bill, but I'll go out and do this gig because I want to. You know?
Yeah, or like I'm really enjoying working on learning some things in guitar that I didn't take the time to learn when I was younger. I really enjoy that. You know, I always look the way that I want my career and really life in general. I remember in Lord of the Rings and Return of the King when Legolas, at the last battle, Legolas was climbing that elephant, right? Take it, you know, to try to take it down. He came up and he killed the beast and he slides off the trunk. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
He just comes down and the whole thing falls. Your career falls and you're just off there with your nice long blonde hair thinking, I'm a badass. And that's really
So
cool.
are you getting extensions? Is this where this is going?
Yeah. But that what a great, you know, that's how I want to, you know, that's how I kind of want to end all of this, is be like, that was great. I did my job.
Yeah.
I'm coming off this thing and I feel good. And who knows what kind of opportunities, you know, good Lord will provide or whatever. But I think I'm just grateful at this point to have done what I've done here, coming here later in life, you know, playing on records with my heroes, producing records and hiring my heroes, playing on shows with my heroes. I mean, it's like somebody would have told me in 2005 living in Seattle that I would have done some of this stuff. I've been like, no way.
Right.
Well, I think that's the takeaway for me, you know, in this conversation is you can have this massively fulfilling career and check all these boxes and not do the biggest thing. Like it's not about doing the biggest thing. It's about that journey in between, how, you know, where I started from, how I got there. Did I do kind of all these other things? Did I, you know, check all these other boxes? I don't necessarily have to go do this international worldwide tour to have a successful career.
Right. It's like redefining the definition of success.
I remember one of the wisest things that were both of our friend Derek Wyatt. Drummer
Love
here
Derek.
in town. Derek is great. Died of Crohn's disease years ago. I remember we were on the Point of Grace gig on the tour, and we were at a balcony, up on the balcony, one show, and Derek had played with Kelly Clarkson during the breakaway. You know, Derek was like,
he was amazing.
He was an amazing player, but he had world tours, like gone for, you know, 16, 18 months at a time.
Most humble dude too. Like you would never have known the places and people that he had played
he was
with.
such a rock star.
Yeah.
And he said, and he had played SNL and the Grammys and just over and over again. And he said, you know what? But nobody cares. The only person that really cares about that is me. Right? You know, and maybe my folks that I did something. So at the end of the day, you know, you can, all of this big stuff, you know, people just forget about it. Nobody's going to know if you played the CMAs or the Grammys or. Yeah. I still have friends that, hey, remember that time I saw you on Good Morning America? And it's like, that's cool. But like, you know, I'd much rather be considered a good husband, a good father. Yeah. You know, those kind of things. Right. You know.
Right. The things that matter.
Faithful follower of God, then I think that all those other things, they're super cool, but I've also learned that, you know, that's.
Yeah. It's almost fleeting.
It's totally fleeting. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the things that matter.
It's the same for me, and I think I struggled to learn that for a long time. You know, I was chasing those things, and you realize kind of all this other stuff that you're missing in the process because you can't be great at all things at all times. And so if you're chasing greatness and becoming, you know,
and at what cost? Because you know, greed and envy is real difficult when you're placing those things about wanting to do this or wanting to do this gig above your family and the things that people that are counting on you. It's like I was, you know, I might joke I'm an only child of only children, and so I always joke that it really is all about me. but the problem is that a lot of my life it really was about me, and I just did not see. Like I wish I would have been there for, you know, best even with my corporate years traveling all the time. Yeah, you know, but that was also a little bit different generation too, where that's just kind of what you did. That was right. My wife reminded me of that. We just celebrated 30 years on June 5th, and she said, you know, I told her I regretted a lot of that time being gone because, but that's, you know, I was I'm that Gen X where that's what you,
Right. That was what it was.
Yeah, that was a good reminder. But these days, you know, we live in a pretty crazy world. Another thing I'd tell guys is just make sure you're keeping, you know, like Billy Crystal says in City Slickers, keep the main thing the main thing. And if your main thing is your family or it's you know, whatever, just make sure that you're always honing in on that and don't get sidetracked.
I think it's important to know. I mean, if you're in the middle of that now, you know, as we segue to the mental health portion of this, we start getting really deep. I think the thing to remember is if you do kind of find yourself in the middle of that, is a lot of that is fixable, you know. But I think you have to realize it in time, and I think you have to come back and you have to work it. It's gonna suck, like to come back and fix some of that stuff because I total voice of experience. You know, but you have to come back and face some of those demons. Like you did, you know, you chased that dream, you did it, you checked the boxes, but obviously, like you said, at what cost? So there are definitely some things that.
Yeah, what did you leave in the wake of that?
Yeah, and you got to come back and face those. You don't get to just forget they didn't happen. You got to come back and face it, but it is fixable. You know, you can come back and you can deal with that. But I can tell you it's massively uncomfortable, and sometimes it sucks.
Yeah.
But I think the payoff is worth it. That's my 2
Yeah,
cents on that.
I mean, Nashville leaves kind of a wake.
Yeah.
A wake of destruction in a lot of people here because, you know, what we inherently do of being a sideman or, you know, touring, especially, you know, it's inherently a solitary thing because you can't take anybody else with you unless you're, you know, luckily like Thompson Square where you're married or, you know, Stapleton and his wife where you can bring your kids on the road and then make it just a giant camping trip out of it. But most people don't have that ability and you're gone for 6 months at a time. That's rough.
Well, I think that was a wake up call for me. It's like you start seeing dudes and it's like, what number wife are you on? You know,
absolutely.
You know, it is hard to find a guy on the road or gal. I mean, it goes both ways. It's hard to find somebody on the road that has not already been divorced at least once.
Yeah.
Some of them multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah, it's carnage. Just like watching the movie 300, but that's what touring looks like, you know.
Oh, man.
You know, it happens a lot. Yeah.
And there are lots of positives. You know, there are lots of positives. You know, there are things that I would have never got to do without doing that.
Totally.
But I think you've said it great multiple times. You just have to be aware of keep the main thing the main thing.
The main thing, yeah.
You know, it really is. I think that's one of the most important things is.
But that's such a hard lesson to learn when you're young, and you're looking at more of how can I advance the career, and you find very few people that are willing to walk away from it.
Well, because I've gotten to here. Why would I walk away now? Because I've finally gotten to here, and it's just this step. One more little step.
A little bit more. If I could do this, then I'd be really happy. And that's not where happiness comes from. But
yeah, man. I mean, it's a counterintuitive approach where you think that all these things will bring you, you know, happiness, but at the end of the day, there is a cost, like you said.
Yeah.
You know, it's a big thing. But as we wrap this episode up, are there any last thoughts, Kenny, on your side?
No, I mean we got real sappy there towards the end.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that'll maybe that'll just start being our trademark.
That's a nice reflective.
I'm gonna go get in the car and have a moment.
We'll all be in the corner with our knees up to our chest in a second. Oaks, thanks for coming by.
Yeah,
thanks for the last minute. Please help me.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
Yeah, no,
had a good time talking.
Yeah, and thank you for coming, and everybody, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and Brian, hopefully in the future we get to have you again, and thank you for listening, and that's it. Make sure to tune in to the next episode of Tourmageddon. Thanks, guys.